Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
We were supposed to start Aleinu last week, and I got derailed, as I sometimes do, so let's really dive into Aleinu today. So we're on page 160 in the Sim, 83 in the Slim, or wherever you have Aleinu in your Siddur. And we said last week, and I'm just going to say this by not to recapitulate everything, but by way of preface, that the first part of Aleinu reads and sounds like a liturgical poem or piyut, typical of an early-ish period. Scholars debate about that early-ish period of that poetry, 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century, right? And you hear it in the rhythm. It's 4 words on each half line, and the half lines are usually parallel. Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol, la'teit gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoyei haratzot, v'lo samanu kemishpachot hadama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam, which is either 3 words because the words are a little longer, gor aleinu and hamonam, or it's 3 words because it sort of actually ends this rhythmical part of the piyut, and so the literary rhythm structure is broken or changed to communicate, to tell you that we're coming to the end, because then beyond that, it's the rhythm of it is different. And again, in the probably Gaonic period, which means the late centuries of the first millennium of the Common Era, this was attributed to Rav, first generation Amora, in Babylonia, first half of the 3rd century, but that is not mentioned in the Talmud at all. And so that's a traditional attribution, which modern scholars would say is probably incorrect. But the poetic rhythm is sort of that era. So let's dive in and look at the content of Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol. Literally, we translate it as it is on us, but that means it is incumbent on us. It is our obligation. It is on us in the English idiom, an idiomatic thing. Aleinu is actually not idiomatic. It's perfectly good Hebrew, right? It's formal Hebrew, right? So we must praise the master of all, Adon HaKol, to give greatness, which means to say, attribute greatness, which means to say, oh, you are great. Okay? It means to express greatness. Liotzer breshit, to the creator of creation, the fashioner of creation. So this sounds like it's parallel, right? L'shabeach is paralleled by lateit gedula, Adon HaKol, we think is synonymous with Yotzer breshit. Later on, maybe today, I'll share with you a view that these are not synonymous, Adon HaKol and Yotzer breshit. They're not just random, nice epithets for God, but they actually have a very specific meaning which might contrast with each other. I'll come back to that. And notice, just poetically, literarily, Aleinu governs both halves of the line. I think in math, they would say it's distributive, right? So it means Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol, Aleinu lateit gedola liotzer breshit, right? So Aleinu governs both halves, but because in good Hebrew you only need to say that once, and if you say it twice, you sound like you're in 1st grade in Hebrew. So because you don't repeat Aleinu, that's why the parallel for l'shabeach is 2 words, right? Because the poet needs 4 words in each half to be balanced. So l'shabeach is parallel to lateit gedula. Surely the poet could have thought of a 1-word synonym for l'shabeach, but the poet had to think of a 2-word synonym for l'shabeach, right? Because he's missing the word because Aleinu doesn't get repeated because it governs both halves. All right? Why should we really praise God? Shelo asanu kigoyei ha'aratzot, who did not make us like the nations of the lands, which means other nations. V'lo samanu kamishbechot ha'adama, and did not make us, lo asanu, lo samanu, parallel, kamishbechot ha'adama, the families of the earth, meaning who did not make us like the other nations, the Gentiles. By the way, goy in the Bible just means a nation. So occasionally in the Bible, Israel is referred to as a goy. Goy echad ba'aretz, a distinctive nation on our planet. I can't remember where the phrase comes. It's in the Siddur. It's only in rabbinic times that goy comes to mean someone from the other nations. Okay? So goyei ha'aratzot means the nations of the lands, which implies the other lands. Everyone with me? And also when Larry for Haftarah Plethora, okay, this is one of my little pet peeves. When people read Haftarot, they're usually from Ezekiel, who uses the word, and it comes across the word goyim. They say, unless you're sort of trained and pay attention to Haftarot, they say goyim. And goyim is not a Hebrew word. Goyim is a Yiddish word. The Hebrew word is goyim. It's sort of an intuitive thing that people do. So when you're reading Haftarah from Yechezkel, the word is goyim, and it means the nations. Okay? So we got to praise God because he did not make us like the other nations. I'll try to be non-gendered because God did not make us like the other nations, although the author of the Siddur definitely is thinking of he. Shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam. Like, what would be so bad about being like the other nations? Like, why would we thank God for that? Because God did not make our portion, chelek, like theirs, and our goral, which means something like destiny, like all of their masses, right? Because our portion and our destiny is not like theirs. This is about Jewish chosenness and distinctiveness. And that is something that bothers a lot of people of the Aleinu, and we'll get to your being bothered by it later. Right now, we're just trying to understand. Now we have a sentence that we take for granted, but that's a little odd in structure. We'll point out the oddness in a moment. And it's clearly not part of the 4-4 poem anymore. The 4-4 poem ends here. End of that little piyut, that little literary structure. Notice we have three triples. Korim umishachavim umodim. We bend the knee and bow and acknowledge or thank. That's a triple. Before who? Melech malchei hamlachim, the king of the kings of kings. Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the holy, some people, the old-fashioned translation, the holy blessed one, or the holy blessing one, the one who's infused with blessing. Okay, so I'm going to translate more literally. Va'anachnu, and we kneel, bow, and acknowledge before the king of the kings of kings, the holy blessing one. The Persian kings, one of their epithets was they called themselves the Persian emperor, I should say, in the Babylonian period. Remember, we say the Babylonian Talmud because they were in Babylonia geographically, but they were actually ruled by the Persians, which had, conquered the Middle East in the several hundred years before. Okay, in the 500s BCE. Okay, so just the confusion about that. It's one of those confusions like, Syrian Greeks with Hanukkah, right? Are they Syrian or are they Greek? Right? So they live in Babylonia, but they're under the Persians. So the Persian emperor referred to himself, emperors always have lots of epithets. Lord of Upper and Lower Egypt, giver of life, etc. So the Persian emperor, one of the Persian emperor's epithets was Melech Hamlachim, king of kings, because it was an empire. So there were various kings and various kingdoms that were conquered by the emperor of Persia. Sometimes they were allowed to keep a king, but he was a vassal king to the emperor, so he was called the King of Kings. So then the Jews in this period came up with the epithet for God. God is the King of Kings, which means God is the king over all the emperors of the earth. That's what the idea behind this. It's like, we're going to take your title and we're going to up you one level higher. Okay? So here's what's curious. Up until now, we had balanced sentences. We praise the mountain, because not made us like the other nations, didn't make us like the other nations, didn't make our portion like theirs, didn't make our destiny like theirs. And we bow before the King of the Kings, the Holy Blessing One. So it's a little odd. It would be sort of like a therefore or and so we. Why does it start with va anachnu? Now I know va, the vav, the conjunctive vav does duty for multiple things, and, but, or, we know that. But still, what's the and here? So anyone who has davened or davens at times from either an Orthodox Siddur or an Israeli Siddur knows the answer to this question. What is the answer to this question? Why is there an and?
Because of the missing words.
Language.
Because we have a line missing.
Yes.
Right? It is a line that has been censored out of the Siddur. So that line is, I got my Siddur in front of me, my Rinat Israel, so I'm not doing it from memory. That line is, She, Heim Mishachavim Lehevel Varik, Umit Palalim El Lo Yoshia. Shehem Mishachavim Lehevel Varik. For they worship emptiness and nothingness, Umit Palalim El Lo Yoshia, and pray to a God that cannot save them. Okay, so that is a line that traditionally was in the Aleinu from the beginning. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about the censorship. We'll get to that. But with this line, then it literally makes more sense. So I'm not going to repeat all the words. I'll just give you the lead-in word in the English translation, right? We thank God who did not make us like the other nations, who makes our portion separate from them. What's the big deal? I mean, so why is that a good thing? Shehem, because they worship useless deities. Va'anachnu korimu mishachavim. This vav would then be translated as but, or maybe in slightly fancier English, while. For, right, we acknowledge God who didn't make us like the Gentiles. For they worship useless, empty gods, while we bow down to the King of Kings, the Holy Blessed One. That makes sense. You might not like it, and a lot of people don't like it, and a lot of people would feel uncomfortable saying it, so that we're going to talk about that, I promise. But that's actually traditional in the Aleinu. Now, through the centuries, there were in the Middle Ages, various Jewish, we call them apostates. If you were a Christian, you would call them a convert, right? There were various Jews who converted to Christianity who said, the Jews in Shul, they trash your God. Part of their prayers is to say that your God is nothing. And actually, they also made the following claim. They claimed that El Lo Yoshia, a God who cannot save, is an explicit reference to, say it out louder, Jesus, whose Hebrew name is Yeshua, Savior, the saving one. It's really sort of similar name to Yehoshua, which just means God saves. Jesus had a nice Jewish name, Yeshua, which ended up in most Jewish sources being shortened to Yeshu, right? So if you read uncensored versions of the Talmud or rabbinic sources, the censored ones changed it, but the uncensored manuscripts refer to him as Yeshu. That's what we say in modern Hebrew. Jesus is Yeshu, but it's short for Yeshua, which is the same name as Yehoshua. Nice Jewish name. And the allegation was, it's not just that they say you worship no gods, but they actually use the name of the Christian God to say he's no God. Also, Varik, Hein Mishtachavim El Hevel Varik, they worship emptiness and nothingness. The gematria, or the thing about the letters of Varik, adds up to the gematria of Yeshu. Yeshu is Shin is 300, and Yud is 10, and Vav is 6, which makes 316. And Varik, Resh and Kuf is 200 plus 100, which is 300. And it also has a Yud and a Vav, which is 316. So they said, when they're really saying those other nations, Christians, bow down to emptiness and then a coded gematria numerical word, Varik, which is 316, same number as Yeshu, Ve'el lo Yoshia, and this God, which you say is the Savior, does not save. That's what those Jews are saying in their prayer every single day. Remember, Aleinu used to be a prayer at the beginning that was only once a year I guess 3 times a year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, 3 days a year. In the earliest Siddurim, it only becomes an everyday prayer, sometime after the turn of the millennium, maybe 11th, 12th, 13th century-ish. So at a certain point, there are apostates who become Christian who report to the Christian authorities that the Jews say this insulting line. By the way, I'll have to go back and look at the article because I haven't read the article in 2 years. But there's some gematria or numerical value of some word where some word in this formula also could be the same numerical value as Muhammad. So it's an equal opportunity knock on the Christians and on the Muslims, the two Gentile worlds in which the Jews lived. Don't try to find it. It's a really complicated one. I'll find it for you. Okay, because it's a very non-intuitive one. So this was an allegation. So there were various attempts throughout the Middle Ages to censor this line out. There are various Christian authorities who tried to censor it out. There was another allegation made. So Reek, they bow down to nothingness. Reek comes from the word rake, which means empty. But it is also similar to what Hebrew word did Vered go away? Vered went, oh, she's not there. Larok, or larok, means to spit. So they also claimed, and when the Jews say this line, they spit, right? Remember, the ground was dirt, right? So the Jews say, the allegation was, and the Jews say, for those Gentiles, bow down to gods that do nothing, patu, right? It's like you spit when you hear something bad. So that was part of the allegation. Whether the Jews did spit or not, whether that was a minhag, I don't know. Finally, in the year 1701, I know this because I read an article, there was actually a court case in a German state. I can't remember. It's like, Saxony or Hamburg or one of those semi-independent German states before Germany was united. There was a court case in which it was decided as a government edict that the Jews could no longer in their synagogues say this line in which they would curse and spit when they said Jesus' name. I think it was 1701. From then on, this line was censored out from most European Siddurim, even though Germany didn't rule Poland or Russia. There ended up being sort of self-censorship because, so this issue had gone on, I think, since I think the first allegation about it was in the 1300s. So this is an issue that percolated for several hundred years. So finally there was this court decision. And from then on, it was censored out. In some Siddurim, they put in like an ellipsis, ... so that you would know that something was missing, or a little printer sigla, like just some little weird doodad. to tell you, that would tell you, the Jewish reader, oh, wink, wink, you know you're supposed to say something here, but we're not allowed to print it. And some Siddurim just did not print it at all. The Sephardim, the Mizrachim, never lost it in their Siddurim, right? Because the German thing, I'll get to that, Michael, when Michael wants to know, so how did it get back there? So the German thing only ended up spreading and governing to Jews of Europe. It never spread to the Jews of the Arab countries. So, like Persians, Moroccans, their Siddurim never lost this sentence. Okay. And what I don't know is if you were a rank and file Orthodox Jew in Poland in the year 1930 or in New York in the year 1960, did you know this by oral tradition, and did you insert the line which you had learned orally, or was it just absent? I don't know the answer to that. I do know that in American printed Orthodox Siddurim, it was just absent. There's no ellipsis, there's no brackets, there's no printer signal. It's just gone. Okay. Then it made a return, I think as far as I can tell, in the 1970s in Orthodox Siddurim, from the 70s on, in Israeli Siddurim first, then in diaspora Orthodox, in Israeli Orthodox Siddurim first, in diaspora Siddurim second. This is just a personal opinion. I could be wrong, but I believe this was part of, get in trouble, okay? This is part of Israeli Orthodox triumphalism at a certain point. Like, to heck with those goyim. They can't tell us what to leave out of our Siddur. We can make our own decisions now without much thought to whether we really like or believe in that line or not. It was sort of like Americans who want to go back to the old ways. Yeah. I just read an article in the paper this morning. Some woman who's in North Carolina, Frank Bruni was interviewing people in North Carolina. She said she wants to go back to the Constitution, back to an America that has God in everything. To which the retort, of course, is like, no, actually, the Constitution does not have God in everything if you would actually read the Constitution. But that's people's perception who want to go back to the good old ways, right? So we're going to go back to the good old ways. We're not going to let those goyim tell us what to say and what not to say. So we're going to say they bow down and worship to emptiness and nothingness because rah, rah. That's my informal opinion. I've never read an article. I'm not going to write that article. Someone can research that. How was the decision made? It was first brought, by the way, the Rinat Yisrael is, just so you know, is not just an Israeli Siddur. It is the Siddur published by the Israeli government Ministry of Religion, which is like a cabinet level, so it's sort of like the official Siddur of the Israeli government, so to speak. So the Rinat Yisrael brought it back. I can't tell you in exactly what year, 70s or 80s. Obviously, Ashkenazim became much more aware of Mizrachim in Israel once they started paying attention. It never disappeared from the Mizrahi Siddurim. And then subsequent to that, it was readopted in American Orthodox Siddurim. I assume because people visited Israel, their kids went for a year in yeshiva. We learned that this line was restored. This is really original. So we should put it back in our Siddurim. So if you read an Orthodox Siddur, if you look at an Orthodox Siddur from like an American one from 1955, let's see, what would that Siddur have been? Birnbaum? I don't know. Birnbaum or something. I'm sure it's not there. Okay. But if you look at contemporary art scroll, Sachs, Koren, it's there. And Koren is in several. Who uses a Koren Siddur? If you do, hold it up. I know a lot of people do. Because it has good production values and it's more complete than our conservative Siddur. So there are a variety. Warren, sorry.
Yeah, in the art scroll, they have it in parentheses.
Correct. So some of them put it in parentheses. In the Koren has various editions. One of them is called the Sachs Siddur because it has notes from the late Lord Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. I have the following on oral tradition. I probably shouldn't say it on something that's recorded and available on the internet. But I actually interviewed, or I did a deep dive into the history of the Aleinu about 2 years ago, because someone asked me a question about it. So I spoke to a prominent modern Orthodox rabbi who was prominent enough that he was able to have a conversation with Lord Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sachs, Zichro Livracha, and said to him before the Sachs Siddur came out, "You're not going to put that line back in, are you? Like, we don't believe in that. That's really offensive." And apparently the answer was, well, that's going to be a matter of selling books, meaning no one's going to buy my Siddur. This marks it as a legitimate Orthodox Siddur, having the sentence in it. Now, there's another edition of the Koren Siddur, which is called the Soloveitchik edition, which is not sanctioned by Rav Soloveitchik because Rav Soloveitchik was dead when it came out. But it has Rav Soloveitchik's footnotes that were put in there by, some of his disciples. And that one has it in parentheses. The Sachs edition does not have it in parentheses. The Soloveitchik edition.
No, it does. It's in parentheses now in the Sachs edition.
In some edition, just so you know, because I have one where it's not in parentheses. So I have a hardcover one, or a larger hardcover one where it's not in parentheses. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. Rav Soloveitchik found this offensive, and he said there should be parentheses. So I asked the modern Orthodox rabbi about it. He said, oh, you should talk to my friend so-and-so who works for Koren Publishers, distributors in North America. So I called up his friend so-and-so, and I said, oh, in the Soloveitchik, it's in parentheses. Does that mean that Rav Soloveitchik was opposed to it? And da-da-da. I thought we'd have a philosophical discussion, to which the answer, once again, like Sachs's answer, was a business answer. The answer was, no, there's an Orthodox rabbi in such and such a city who has a big shul who said he was going to order 1,000 copies, but he would only order it and pay for it if we put parentheses around that line to indicate that he disapproves of that line. That's why the parentheses are there. So the parentheses are there or not there, not because of what Rabbi Sachs thought, not because of what Rabbi Soloveitchik thought, but rather to let you know this is missing in lots of editions and some people think it should be there. Literarily, it makes more sense, right? Thank you for not making us like the other nations, for they bow down to nothingness, while we bow down to the real God. And, of course, for those who are disturbed by what feels like the chauvinistic theological exclusivism of the Aleinu, saying that line makes that much clearer and much harsher, which is why none of the liberal movements have reintroduced that line, even in parentheses, okay? Because we think it's offensive, right? There are enough struggles with the Aleinu, right? Transliterated article says some congregations omit. Yep. So there are enough things to struggle with in the Aleinu in terms of its what some see as sort of theological triumphalism, without adding that sentence, which is really like, there's no way to, there's certain things we can reinterpret to soften it, right? They bow down, the other nations, they bow down to emptiness and nothingness, and that gods that are useless, they pray to gods who are useless. You can't reinterpret that line, right? And that's why we meaning all conservative, reform, Masorti, right, progressive, Siddurim in the world, as far as I know, none of them has ever reintroduced that line, even though in the Orthodox Siddurim from the 70s on, it has migrated back in, sometimes in parentheses, sometimes not. I'm going to pause here. Larry first. You have a hand up. You've been patient.
Yeah, I want to just reiterate what you said or support what you said. And you were a little bit tentative. This was an issue of triumphalism. This is a political right-wing move. This statement is not only theological, it's political, sociological. And there was a lot. I remember there being a variety of incidents that I was aware of, one of which was when I don't remember who it was. It might have been a child of one of our members. Came to our shul, Moreshet Avraham in Israel. It's a shul of Reuven Hammer and David Golinkin, and Benji Siegel and other notables, and introduced that line, which we never did. And neither Diane and I remember what happened, but we both remember the incident. And it caused a big hubbub or a big furor.
Mm-hmm.
Like that too, like in the prayer for Israel.
And also, Diane mentions in the prayer for Israel, in the prayer for the soldiers.
For the Chayalim.
The prayer for the Chayalim. There's a line similar that causes a lot of political rifts. So I'm just prayer is not only spiritual, it's theological, sociological, and it is political.
I will let that comment stand. Thank you, Larry, for commenting. Yeah.
The call on the field is confirmed.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm just saying, I'm saying Larry is stating his opinion, and I will not state an opinion about his opinion because I'm trying to just teach Siddur. Okay. The thing that I did say was my hypothesis about why would it have come back into Israeli Siddurim when Ashkenazim did not say that. Ashkenazim got along fine without that line for, over 2.5 centuries. No one at a certain point, no one said boo hoo hoo. Although maybe they did. Maybe the Siddurim from the 1800s that had the ellipsis printed, and again, was there, it'd be interesting to know, you'd have to talk to some older people, did anyone actually have oral masoret? There's a line that we say here that we're not allowed to print, but I want you to know the line and to say it. I actually don't know anything about that. That would be interesting to know. Warren. Oh, Warren, I think you had your hand up, but then you went off camera.
Okay, well, I'm not saying I like this line, but I think it could be interpreted to be a criticism of materialism.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay,
How?
And just that I always think idolatry is basically a metaphor for materialism. I mean, you're worshiping material objects, and so I think it can be sort of reinterpreted that way. In fact, I think it's important to talk about the bigger subject of why we are considered different than the other nations spiritually. Okay, do we have? And I think that's a very important issue because there's a lot of beautiful spirituality outside of Judaism. And so what is Judaism? How is Jewish spirituality different than non-Jewish spirituality?
Okay.
And I think this prayer raises that issue.
Okay, good. So I want to say I want to wrap up soon. So I want to say 3 quick things in response. One, that last question that you raised is how is Jewish spirituality different from others is a big question. And because I'm not sure we're going to get to that in this class, just because we're focusing on Siddur, and that's a whole other class unto itself. Number 2, your reinterpretation that it's not about other gods they worship, but other things that they worship, that you're interpreting idolatry to mean materialism. I think I agree with you. That's how I say the Aleinu. That's how I understand the Aleinu. Many other people do. I think that is a modern reinterpretation, and we should be aware of that. We should cop to that, by which I mean, I don't believe the author of the line meant that.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.